stay seated. Should there be a need to evacuate, and a Springmore staff member will direct you on how to leave in an orderly fashion. Please remember not to use the elevators and go to the red pole once outside. If you haven't already done so, please, at this particular point, silence your cell phone so it will not interrupt the program once it starts. He's been here several times before, so I know many of you are about to hear him again. He always does a tremendous performance for us. So, Robert Buxton, it's yours.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you very much. And thank you all for being here this evening. I'm Robert. I'm going to do some classical piano, some gospel at the end, and speak about it a bit. And I'll also keep tabs on time because I have a tendency to play and speak for too long, long-windedness. I'd like to start by improvising something for you. That's something I enjoy doing. And that's what they used to do in the classical world, but it's fallen a bit out of fashion. Many ways to do it. In some places, I'll give you a choice. And recently I've take a melody like Happy Birthday or something like that, or Yankee Doodle or something, and ask you what style of composer's style you'd like to hear it in. Sometimes it's funny, like we did Mary Had a Little Lamb in the style of Stravinsky somewhere, came up with it. Another thing we could do is you could give me a series of random notes and I would, so which one would you prefer? Do you want to hear the Happy Birthday in the style of somebody or random notes? Anybody? Okay, all right, so let's do it. So how about Happy Birthday notes? Okay, that's a good, everybody knows it. I know it, that's good. That's important for this. Which composer would you like to hear Happy Birthday in the style? Now I have the right to say no, some don't work as well. Everybody says Mozart and Chopin, so maybe something a little,
Bach.
I heard Tchaikovsky and Bach. How about little snippets of each? Let's see. Okay, so Tchaikovsky's relatively easy. I just take the first concerto and improvise Happy Birthday. So which is something like this. I realize it's a little bit gimmicky. Okay, Bach, I'll try to make, I can't really improvise a fugue, that's very hard, but a fugue-like piece by Bach, let's call it that. Suppose it's not really by Bach, it's fake Bach. the older the composer, the harder it is to improvise, because the history of music is the rules of composition get not easier, but more relaxed and more relaxed. And that's my theory. So in other words, composers got lazier as time went on. But anyway, let's go on to the actual program. So I'm going to play you more violin arrangements. I'm still living out my dream to become a violinist without actually having to learn to play the violin. It's just too much trouble. Life is too many things to do. So last time I played Beethoven's Violin Concerto, the first movement, in Beethoven's own arrangement. That's that first movement only. It's 25 minutes or so. Today I'm going to do shorter pieces. I will include the second movement of the Beethoven. It's short. So today's theme is kind of short works, originally for violin or voice, but generally played on violin and of course arranged for piano. So I'm going to start with a piece from the 18th century. This is the Gavotte by Gossec, Gossec. He was a French composer, lived at the time of Mozart. Actually, they knew each other and were friendly. And Gossec, he's not played so much nowadays, maybe here in France. I think he's still pretty popular. Wonderful composer. He wrote lots of operas and Mass, that's very beautiful also. And this Gavotte is actually from an opera called Rosine. He wrote it right before the French Revolution. I think it's like a year before or something, if I'm not mistaken. And for that reason, it evokes, for me, Versailles. I imagine I'm in Versailles. All those powdered wigs and those fancy gardens and everything. And this piece has a humorous feature to it, which is that it has, I call it a musical hiccup. Let me show you what I mean. So, I imagine having a very polite, refined conversation with someone, but you have the hiccups. And you go, yes, of course, I do think that, And it's just funny in that way. It has this humorous attribute to it. So Gossec's Gavotte, indeed. You'll mostly hear it on violin. That's why I'm playing it. There's a wonderful recording from 1926 of Misha Elman playing it. It's on YouTube. It's a video. It's a very old video recording. It's just incredible. That's why I learned this piece, because it's violin. So Gossec's Gavotte. told you the pieces were shorter. If you remember last time I played you this 25-minute thing, so I meant it. So that's Gossek, and that's a world that disappeared, for better or worse, the world before the French Revolution. I'm now going to play the second movement of Beethoven, Violin Concerto. The second movement is obviously much shorter than that first one. But I think even in this second movement, you can hear a different consciousness. This is 1806 now. It's after the French Revolution, after the American Revolution. It's a different time. And Beethoven was a very different figure. I think in a way he was the first. Mozart sort of did this, but he was the first to work for himself. He was not employed by the court, for example, like Haydn or Salieri or these people. Bach worked for the church, right? But Beethoven was this rugged individualist, you could say. And he wrote for himself, really, and for the world, obviously. But the violin concerto, and forgive me if you heard this last time I was here, but just to reiterate a bit, Beethoven wrote the violin concerto in 1806, and the first performance was a sort of a disaster. People fell asleep, because particularly for Beethoven, it's quite meditative, reflective music. And maybe that's not what they expected from him. And he was not thrilled with this performance, this first performance. So he actually, in that first performance, the violinist Franz Clement, in between the first and second movement, he turned his violin upside down, improvised a country fiddle tune, raucous tune, to wake everybody up. Can you imagine that in Carnegie Hall? But what people, I think, weren't knowing about the piece at the time was Beethoven wrote it when he knew he was losing his hearing. He knew for sure. There were signs of it in the late 1790s. But by 1803 or so, he knew it. And there's this wonderful, very dark but also uplifting document. It's a letter called the Heilige Stadt Testimony. Beethoven wrote this letter to his brothers, describing how he's losing his hearing. He described being in the countryside, more on that later. He loved the countryside. With some friends, walking through a field, and they heard a shepherd's song, but he couldn't hear it, and how much despair he had. In that letter, he explains that he's contemplating to take his own life even. But he found the resolve to keep going, and it's an incredible story, because by the end of his life, he almost couldn't hear it all, and he heard all his music in his head. So I found it very inspiring. If you're looking for some motivation, inspiration, maybe we all need it sometimes. It's that letter. It's like he's talking directly to us today, Beethoven. The second movement is so placid. It's so serene. It really does evoke the countryside for me. Beethoven would go and spend lots of time in the country. He said no one could love the countryside more than I do. Also, nature, think of it, is a big theme for the romantics. Romantic music, romantic painting, etc. So that's part of it too. Did I forget to mention? Yeah, Beethoven. Why is there a piano version of this? He was not thrilled with how the first performance went on violin, so he rewrote it. He adapted it for the piano. That's what happened. And then after he died, the violin version became popular again. Right? The piano version is done sometimes, but not as much. But anyway, I'm going to play the second movement. It's just the most calm music you could imagine. I hope you don't fall asleep. I don't think so, but it is quite meditative and gentle for Beethoven, especially. So, a few things to notice. I think one, I remember what one professor of mine said. He said Beethoven has a lot of silences, or that the music just stops. Did you notice that there? And it's because the professor thinks he was increasingly living in a world of silence. So that's I find that really interesting. Also, it's very hymn-like. It sounds like a hymn. I also feel that the emotion there is acceptance. He's accepting what's going on. There's a lot of peace there. It's extremely peaceful. So I'm going to play now a work of Dvorak. This is called Songs My Mother Taught Me. It's a famous piece of Dvorak's. He wrote it for voice originally. I don't sing in Czech, of course. Then Fritz Kreisler, who we'll talk about in a bit, he arranged it for violin, and that's why I'm playing it, because of the violin thing. This is a piano arrangement by a guy named Eduard Schütz, who was Russian. He had a German name, but he lived in St. Petersburg in the 19th century. The text is quite beautiful, if I could sing. It's something along the lines of, I recall songs my mother taught me, and now I teach them to my children. And the melody is probably going to be familiar. So it's from the gypsy songs, because Dvorak, was Czech, and that gypsy music, klezmer music, that's the folk music of Eastern and Central Europe, and inspired him very much. And furthermore, Dvorak, he just loved any folk music. When he came to this country, he lived here for a while, he was collecting, Native American music, African American spirituals, incorporating those things into his music. So he just loved folk music. So here is the songs my mother taught me. Getting over a bit of a cold. I don't know if you might hear my voice, so I'm trying to not space out when I play with it. So, all right. Polish composer Moritz Moszkowski. He was very popular during his lifetime, not so much now. I think it's because his music is fun and bubbly, and the classical music world maybe doesn't love that so much now. If a piece is not downright miserable, well, it's not, why even bother? No, I'm just joking, of course. But there's it's salon music is kind of what Moszkowski is. This piece is called Guitar, and come to think of it, it's the only original piano piece I'm actually playing tonight, because in this case, Moszkowski wrote it for piano, and his friend Pablo de Sarasate, who was a violinist, he arranged it for violin, and that's normally the version you hear. So I'm playing the original one. It's kind of an opposite. Usually most of these are starting with the violin or the voice or something else, and then they migrate to the piano. So Moszkowski's guitar, it's emulating flamenco music, flamenco guitar. So here it is. I love his music. He's great. He wrote so many lovely short pieces, and a big, actually, you know who really liked to play his music was Vladimir Horowitz. He didn't play this piece, I don't think. Probably did, but didn't record it. But Horowitz played a lot of other pieces by Moszkowski. There's a piece called 18 Cell Sparks, or some of the etudes, the studies. Really bubbly music. Moszkowski reminds me of the bubbles in champagne or Coca-Cola, whichever one you prefer. It just has that bubbly, positive music. It's upbeat, and sometimes that's a part of life too. Now I'm going to play. Speaking of not upbeat, I'm going to play a piece by Tchaikovsky. This is the melody in E flat major. It is for violin. He sought to put this as part of his violin concerto, which is based very much on Beethoven, but he decided not to, so this piece became a standalone violin work. It's not in the violin concerto. It was a draft. And I don't know why it didn't make it to the concerto, because it's so beautiful. It's just a very beautiful piece. Russian music in general, I mean, you can't generalize, but in fact, Tchaikovsky's contemporaries didn't consider him very Russian. They said he's more of a French type of composer, whatever that meant. Because somebody like Mussorgsky or Borodin, for instance, they would use Russian folk melodies much more consciously than Tchaikovsky would. Tchaikovsky did, but not quite as much. But to me, it sounds Russian. There's something about the melodies of Tchaikovsky and Rachmaninoff. I always do this demonstration, one of the famous themes from Rachmaninoff's Second Concerto, contrasted with Mozart. Here's a Mozart melody of the theme, you know. I mean, it's short ideas, right? Short things. Listen to Rachmaninoff. Still going. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And somebody said it like this. I think it was a poet, Joseph Brodsky maybe, said that Russia has so much wide open space that that's what the melodies do. They go, you know, long. They're long-winded. So anyway, just something to think about. Here's the Tchaikovsky melody in E flat. Next, with the violin theme, Fritz Kreisler. I'm going to play you a short piece of Fritz Kreisler's. It's called Viennese Caprice, or Caprice Viennois. Kreisler was from Vienna, and maybe there's nothing more Viennese than him. Maybe Wiener Schnitzel and Fritz Kreisler and Johann Strauss Jr. And I've been trying to think about Vienna, the culture of Vienna, because Vienna had so many great musicians, composers living there. And I say living there because a lot of them were not actually born there. Schubert was, but Mozart was born in Salzburg. Haydn was born in a small town, not Vienna. Beethoven was born in Bonn. He was far away, what's now Germany. You could go on. Brahms was from Hamburg. They all lived in Vienna. They all ended up there. But Fritz Kreisler is just through and through, he's Viennese. Here's a way to compare and contrast, say, Berlin and Vienna. It's an old joke that I've heard. I think it's from the 19th century. They say, in Berlin, things are very serious, but there's hope. But in Vienna, things are not so serious at all, but there's no hope. And that's how I feel when you hear Schubert, because Schubert can go in this, can write a Ländler, a dance, which is actually sort of a predecessor to the waltz, which became the predominant, much-loved dance of Vienna, right? But Schubert could write something that's a Ländler, and it's just so cheerful, and then he can turn to such a dark corner. You know, Schubert knew he only died when he was 31. He only lived to 31. So, there's this darkness mixed with a smile, tears with a smile. And that's Kreisler. When you look at pictures of him, he was this very smiley, bubbly guy, all with a little mustache. He's always smiling, very warm-hearted. There's a quote from him that I love very much. He said, "I don't go to give concerts. I simply go to see my friends." I like that. This is a great guy. I told myself that coming in here, right? I mean, we're all friends, right? So it's a great way to think. And not all of these classical people were friendly like that. Beethoven probably wasn't. Anyway, Fritz Kreisler, it's an early piece of his. What happened tragically was Vienna, there's another indie historian or someone said, Vienna is all about the waltz, right? But Vienna, sometime in the 1920s and 30s, Vienna waltzed right off of a cliff into fascism and anti-Semitism. And, Kreisler was Jewish and his family, and they were very fortunate. They got out, came to America. Not everyone was so fortunate. And part of what's so tragic about this is that a man who so embodied Vienna was so rejected in such an ugly way. But that's, just a whole other discussion. But this is an early work of Kreisler's. It's just very pure. It's very positive, and you might hear his little wit there. He has a certain wit to him. So. Proof that I think music can be so universal as a language. Whenever I play that last chord, I hear giggles, because that's Chrysler's giving you a little wink. It's tongue-in-cheek. Did I tell you the story about Chrysler and Rachmaninoff? I'll tell you really quickly. That they were friends in this country. They were both exiles. Rachmaninoff from Russia, of course. And they played together, but Chrysler never practiced. Maybe he didn't need to. He just didn't like to. He'd rather be with people, with his friends. And they were playing in Carnegie Hall. Rachmaninoff was a very somber person. If you see photos of him, he never smiled. Shaved head, tall guy. Someone said he looked like an escaped convict on the loose, right? So they were playing, and Chrysler messed up in the middle of the concert. Rachmaninoff was still playing. Rachmaninoff wouldn't even move when he played. Sat like a stone. And Chrysler just goes up to him and he says, "Where are we?" And Rachmaninoff mutters from the side of his mouth, "Carnegie Hall." It didn't help, you know. So that's the kind of person he was. They were, and they played pranks on each other, sort of. So I'm going to play now some French music. I'm looking at the time again. I don't want to go too late because that's a big problem I have. So here's a piece called La Cinquantaine, the 50th anniversary. It's another one of these subtle pieces. It's subtle salon music, and in some ways it's my favorite thing to do. I'm going to close with something with some fireworks. Don't worry. But I love to play these more subtle things. It's fun. There's a beauty there, I think. This is La Cinquantaine means the 50th anniversary, and I'm picturing here a couple celebrating their 50th anniversary, reflecting on the past. And there's positive memories. There's sad memories. They're all mixed together. So in some ways, it's a very Chrysler-esque piece. There was a big band version of this in the 40s. Woody Herman did it, but it's quite different from this. And many people tell me, they say, this sounds like klezmer music. And I love klezmer music, so I like that comparison. Now, it's not a klezmer piece, but there is a similarity to it. I don't exactly know why, but it really has that flavor to it. So here is La Cinquantaine by Jean-Gabriel Marie, a composer who I honestly can't find anything about. He was a French composer in the late 19th century. If you can find some more information on him, please let me know. But I'm having trouble. short classical pieces here. This, I think the next I may have done here last time, I don't recall, but I'll play it differently maybe. So this is, yeah, I can't, that was only a few months ago. I wish I could learn faster, but you know, I wish I could bring a whole new, completely new program every time I come. But this is a piece called, this is a famous piece, a meditation from Thais by Massenet, arranged for piano, I believe by Massenet himself. I'm not sure though. It doesn't say on the sheet music. But I'll tell you a bit about the opera. Massenet wrote Thais in 1891. And it's the story of the opera. It's about a young woman who lives in Alexandria, Egypt, during the Roman Empire times, late Roman Empire, and she is an adherent of the goddess Venus, you know, the Greco-Roman gods and goddesses. And there's a young man who's a Christian monk, an early Christian monk, and he tries to convert her, and in the process falls in love, because that's what happens in operas. If you don't have that, you don't have an opera, unfortunately. But Thais is not done too often because apparently it's hard to sing. Renee Fleming could do it, but maybe not so many others, so I've heard. This meditation from Thais is not actually sung, it's an interlude played by the violin and orchestra in the opera between certain scenes in the plot. And it became so beloved that violinists just would play it as a standalone concert piece. And here I am playing it on the piano because I don't play violin, so here it is. played that somewhere, and a lady came to me, she said, let me tell you a secret. Okay. Clearly, it's much better on the violin. So, I don't doubt it. Actually, I had another experience. I have some violinist friends who were not so thrilled with this thing I'm doing. They said, this is not fair, you've taken our repertoire. And someone said to me, you know, that Beethoven concerto, what a vulgar arrangement, what sort of a horrible musician would have done that arrangement? And I said, well, Beethoven did it himself, sorry to tell you. But anyway, it's just fun, you know, to joke around. Okay, so I'm going to play one more classical piece and then maybe one or two gospels. I want to get you out by 8, a little after 8. So this is a more upbeat thing. This is a piece I never dreamed I would learn. There is a violin version I found out later, but this is the Malagueña by Ernesto Lecona. Famous things, there's even words to it, in the guitar version and such. There's violin, there's a cello, everyone does it. And I never was going to learn it because one of my major teachers was Cuban, Solomon Bukowski, and he would tell me in his accent, which I can imitate very well. He didn't think so, but I do. He would tell me, oh, Robert, how can you play this music when you don't even come from Cuba? Well, it's actually it's music. Malagueña is from Spain. Malaga is a city in the south of Spain that's famous for its flamenco music. But his point was that I don't really breathe that culture. And he's right. That's why I didn't want to learn it, because I feel I wouldn't get it. I still feel like I don't have a lot to learn here. So I'm trying to listen to some flamenco guitarists and such, try to pick it up. But there was a lady at a place I play, another place in Raleigh I play. She would ask me to play this piece every time I go. And I started, after a year, I felt very guilty. So I had to learn it. So here it is, the Malagueña by Ernesto Lecona. could do a couple short gospels. If you need to leave, that's please do. It's past 8. Okay, 8:05. Okay, so I'm gonna do. This is one that Mahalia Jackson and Elvis would sing quite often. It's called "Crying in the Chapel." It sounds very similar to a Duke Ellington song called "In a Sentimental Mood," but it ain't that. And I have to tell myself that, or I'll start playing the Duke Ellington instead. Okay. This will be it. I'm going to do very quick a country gospel waltz called Wings of a Dove, also from the 50s, 1950s. Ferlin Husky sang it. It was written by Bob Ferguson. I have a distinct memory of this song because my dad loves it, and was listening to it in the car, and my wonderful grandmother, who's no longer with us, Louise Buxton, who was from Portsmouth, Virginia, very cultivated, high-class lady. She did not like this kind of music. And she had this wonderful Gone with the Wind accent. And it was playing in the car, and she says to my dad, whose name is Brian, but she called him Brian. She said, "Brian, what on earth is that music?" And my dad said, "Oh, that's Wings of a Dove by Ferlin Husky, Silence." And my grandmother says, "What sort of name is Ferlin Husky?" She did not like it, so I happen to love it. It's a gospel waltz. It's, it's a straightforward waltz. Did I hear something? You really want one more? I mean, really? Okay, I mean, I don't, okay. A gospel, you want gospel or classical? Do you want upbeat gospel or more upbeat? Yeah, okay, because it was a mellow program for the most part, but then at the end I gave you a little caffeine boost. Okay, so do you want to hear, I got several upbeat things I could do. I have, I think I did it last time. He's got the whole world in his hands. I have also Joshua fit the Battle of Jericho. You have to choose. And then a Tom T. Hall song, but that's more country. I did country. How about a spiritual? So between those two, Joshua or He's Got the World. Okay, let's do that. Okay, that gets a little. It has to be loud because you got to get those walls to tumble down. All right. Thank you so much. That's all, folks. See you next time.
Thank you.
Oh, I'd love to, anytime.
Thank you, sir.